When you see some of the stats that are out there at the moment, 28% stated that they left their job due to a negative relationship with a manager.
Working with a coach, how did that make you a better leader?
Coaching enabled me to be a better person, and that enabled me to be a better leader. I think it can be quite upsetting when something you believed about yourself is demonstrated to not be true. You just have to intentionally do it knowing it's going to be a benefit, not quickly dismiss it just because it is fast moving, because everyone's tired.
What other things can we do as middle managers that can make our lives a little bit easier?
Yeah. I think
very quickly, before we start this episode, I've got a massive favour to ask of you, and it's all about helping us to continue serving the people in the hospitality industry, just like you. And really, why we do this podcast is to help anyone from entry-level posts all the way through to CEOs to become better leaders and ultimately create better guest experiences for the people who visit their properties. Right now, all I need you to do is hit subscribe to this podcast. That's it. I only want you to subscribe because the majority of people that join us on the podcast don't actually subscribe. And that helps us reach more people. But even better than that, it helps us bring better guests, better content to help you and our industry. That's it. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Hit subscribe now and let's get into this episode. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on the Hospitality Leadership Podcast. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good. And I'm so glad that we can make this happen. A fellow leadership coach, or
Yep.
I know you style yourself on middle management coach, don't you? And
Yes.
that's, it's a really tough place to be in any business, in any industry. And we'll get onto that in a minute. But first and foremost, I want to know a little bit more about you, what your career has looked like and what's led you up to become a coach today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and great to see you. So I forged my career in the energy industry. That's where I started. So I sort of fell out of university, like many of us do, going, oh, what am I going to do with this? So I've worked really hard and I've been really studious and I followed the academic pathway that I was told I should do. And now I don't really know what I'm going to do with it. I think my first realization was, I probably need to earn some cash. And I think that's probably what drove a lot of my initial career decisions. But yeah, I found myself working in the energy industry totally by accident, but I absolutely loved it. I loved the pace and the vibrancy of business and the environment I was working in. It was a very corporate environment. And I actually quite liked that about it. I liked the structure and I liked the professional nature of it. And I just loved working with so many different people and being part of quite a large team and having the ability to interact with such a variety of teams. So it was a brilliant space to learn and to grow, which I think I was very fortunate to have, especially because a lot of the learning I did was what I would describe as very organic. It wasn't formal learning. And that was fine for a long time until I hit a particular point in my career about 10 years ago where I'd been able to successfully achieve a number of promotions and found myself in that middle management space. And really, I describe it as like out of the blue. I'm sure it wasn't like that. But I remember just feeling very lost and struggling with my confidence and my self-belief. And I've always described myself as quite a confident individual. I've been very confident in myself, my own skin, who I am, and generally I would say my capabilities. But it felt like almost overnight, all of that disappeared. And this glass ceiling came out of nowhere, which made me very much feel like, well, that's it. This is as good as it's going to get. It's as far as you're going to go. You're not going to be any better than this. And it started to really erode and chip away at how I felt about my job, how I felt about the company, how I felt about the people around me. I started to really get what I now would classify as that sense of imposter syndrome, constantly feeling like I'm going to get found out for being completely useless and incapable. And, why is she here? Why is she leading these teams? She's not any good at it. She can't do it. Anyway, this went on for a very long time. And I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to quit. I don't know what else to do. I've tried lots of different things, but I think I'm just going to leave. And it was a member of my family who stated, well, have you thought about getting some coaching? Now, at that stage, I'd never heard of coaching outside the context of sport. So
Mm.
I was very quick to dismiss it and go, this isn't suitable. This isn't for me. I was very proud as well. I think I developed in a culture where it was all about you sort yourself out, you fix
Mhm.
things for yourself. So asking for help, especially externally, wasn't something I felt comfortable with. I just thought, well, who is this person? You know, they're a complete stranger. They haven't got a clue about me. Anyway, out of desperation, I got some coaching. I funded it myself and just thought, right, sod it, let's do this. And I found the whole experience just so transformational. It really helped me to understand what was going on, why I was feeling the way I was. It gave me permission, I think, to let go of some real damaging ideas that I had
Mhm.
about myself and my place of work and those around me and my career in general, I think, that had probably been holding me back and I just wasn't aware of it. But I would say the biggest realization was coaching as a practice and a skill and realizing how crucial it could be to my own leadership style. And that's what set me on a path to training coaching, qualify as a coach, and then move my whole career into coaching full time, which is what I now do. Um, but I think along that way, I started in energy. I transitioned into soft drink manufacturing. So I went to work for Lucasade Ribena for a few years.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and uh, as sort of subsequently going on was I met my husband who owned a pub in the Cotswolds. And we decided to co-run that pub at the end of 2019. So then I stepped into hospitality leadership just for, I mean, I felt like, just for a bit of a laugh. No, I'm joking. But, that really, I would say, tested every single skill I
Yeah.
possess in so many different ways, from leadership to business and commercial acumen to customer service. And generally like tolerance and patience for people, I would say, of
Yeah.
all kinds.
But
Um,
I
yeah.
think it is definitely I think people who are not in hospitality never really appreciate the pace and the speed that things happen on a day-to-day basis, do they?
No,
And you're
no way.
talking about
No, they don't.
transitioning from corporate, a corporate environment, and leadership in a corporate environment is very much you've got time in a way to, nurture people, even just in casual conversation. You miss that opportunity in hospitality. You've got to be a lot more intentional about it. But I want to go
Yeah.
back to your experience, working with a coach.
Mm.
What was it like at first, moving into that sphere and opening up really to work with a coach?
I think I had a lot of reservations to begin with, and I think that had been the blocker to seeking help and even engaging with a coach to
Mhm.
begin with. And then, to be quite honest, I think, as I described, I just got to the stage where I was exhausted by how I felt and the situation. I was so frustrated for having not made any progress to resolve it that I thought, well, I am a trier. Like, I'm always up for giving things a try. And I thought, you know, there's no harm here to giving this a go. Like, if it makes things better, then it's a win. And if it doesn't, I'm no worse off than I was before.
Mhm.
So I think that was the attitude I had when I decided to just set up a conversation with this person. And I have to admit, my research was pretty minimal. I think I put into Google, like, I don't know, professional coach in Oxfordshire, because that's where I live. And this came up. And I just remember clocking this person's profile, reading about them, feeling some kind of connection with what they'd written. And then when I spoke with them over the phone, I immediately loved their style and their manner.
Yeah.
And they were very no nonsense. And I love no nonsense. I like directness. I like bluntness. I I like someone who just cuts through the noise and the shit, I guess, and tells it as it is. And I think they were like that straight away on the phone and seemed to have really grasped how I felt. And so I felt reassurance that actually this person could be really good for me. I already feel like they complement me. So let's just book a couple of sessions and see how it goes. Um, and I think after that initial call, I felt quite excited by the first session. I was
Mm,
excited about it. It was emotional. I mean, that first session, I think I found so releasing. I remember feeling like the weight had lifted from my shoulders, and therefore there was a moment of emotional relief too. And I think some of it was, and yeah, and this connects with who I am as a person. I think I was a tad emotional because of that. I suppose I don't know whether it's like frustration at going, oh, it's so obvious now. Why didn't I know this myself? Now I think I can be a bit like that. Like I can get upset. Not that I'm it's not as simple as saying I'm sad. I'm just a little bit frustrated and disappointed.
mm,
And sometimes that comes out in tears because I think I was just like, oh, this isn't actually that complicated. But it generally isn't, I think. Sometimes it's the most obvious that we can't see.
mhm.
Um, it's not often rocket science, but it's just that having somebody else there who's completely impartial, unbiased, doesn't know you, has no connection with your life whatsoever, just having them there, giving the perspective or helping you to see things differently is just so powerful. And I think that is one of the huge benefits of coaching, and having a coach.
Yeah. I think it's and coaching, the experience is emotional. It's a
Mm.
very and I think that's what shocks a lot of people, certainly my clients, when you first tell them like this is going to be challenging.
Yes.
But and you'll probably find the same is those sessions where you do really challenge and emotions do come out and we deal with that as coaches, but they are often the most impactful
Yeah.
sessions for your client because that's where you really get that deep exploration. And
Yeah.
you touched on it there is I think people are skeptical about what the potential of coaching,
Mm.
and the reality is it gives you think as an individual that you've got you can see everything, you're considering everyone's perspectives. One session with a coach and you can flip that on its head because that's where you sort of explore
Yeah.
the other areas that you may have missed. And that's the
Yeah.
power of having a coach
Yeah.
working with you.
Absolutely. But I think it's also what is terrifying to people
Yeah.
sometimes. Like, I actually had this experience, it still happens to me now. I was coached for the first time nearly 10 years ago. I've been qualified since 2016. I never stopped learning and I never stopped learning about myself. Yes, there's a concerted effort to continue to maintain those things. They're not, they take intention to do. But, less than 2 weeks ago, I had a realization about myself and it was hard, and
Yeah.
it was upsetting. And I think it can be quite upsetting when something you believed about yourself is demonstrated to not be true.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, those thoughts you have about yourself is what you show the world. It's how you behave. It's how you show up. It's like the security as well that you build around yourself. And when that gets challenged, or even when you realize it's not right for you anymore, or it needs changing, that can be quite hard to deal
Mhm.
with. And as I said, like that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. And, I'm nearly 40 and I'm still having those learnings and realizations, and they are difficult, but they are totally worth it. Like I say to my client, it will be challenging and you may feel uncomfortable at points. And what I ask is you sit with the discomfort and you just see where it leads because it's uncomfortable, usually for good reason. If it feels uncomfortable, we're in the right place. Like we've hit something that's really important.
Yeah.
And actually, the more you can tolerate it, the more benefit you'll gain and you'll learn, and it will have a much more positive impact overall.
Yeah.
Now, clearly, if it's that uncomfortable and they're literally like, Lisa, can you stop now? I'm hating
Yeah.
it. That's different, but that never happens. Most people go, okay, fine. I'm open to it. I'll give it a go. And it is in those moments, like you described, where the magic happens, I think.
Our job as coaches is to create a space that is safe, isn't it?
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
the primary set from day one with any client, we set up a space that they feel safe, and you collaborate on that. And that's
Yeah.
what I think some people miss out on. But I want to go back to, again, something you said before about how coaching, or you thought coaching would have impacted how you showed up as a leader. What, being a client,
Mm.
obviously dealing with elements of, your career, how did going through, uh, working with a coach for those sessions, how did that make you a better leader? What skills did you take from those sessions and apply them to,
Mm.
your work life?
Yeah. I think coaching enabled me to be a better person, and that enabled me to be a better leader.
Hmm.
I think I often talk about it with my clients that if you want to be a really good leader, the best place to start is with yourself. I think often people come to me with challenges, problems that sound like on the surface that they relate to others around them and that they are to do with the day to day practical challenges of managing people, of communicating, of relationship building, of dealing with conflict. But actually, when you drill down into the detail, it's the common theme within all of it is that person, it's them,
Hmm.
and it's their understanding of themselves and what's going on that requires work. Because I think once you've got that better understanding of yourself, the way you think, the way you feel about things, your triggers, actually all of that gives you so much more of a strong foundation to
Hmm.
build on to then carry yourself into those scenarios at work to then be able to manage and lead other people. So I think that's what coaching gave me was that I understand myself so much more now. I'm so much more aware of what's not working for me and that I need to improve and change. Because once I feel great, I am so much better for everybody else. You know, it does all, I think, in leadership, it all starts with you. It is only about you to begin with. And it's what you always have to maintain to then be brilliant for other people. And I also think when you grow your awareness of yourself and you build up the skills and techniques to do that, your awareness and appreciation for other people heightens.
It
So I
is.
think that's where I'm very much of the view of when it comes to leadership and the leadership coaching and management coaching I do and training, it all starts with the people in the room first. And then we talk about and now how do you take that out in the into the workplaces.
Yeah, you have got to start with the self first, and again, it's something I come up against with clients, is that they want to get straight on to dealing with the issue or dealing with the challenge, and and all the time it's about how do we focus on actually what are you doing, what awareness do you have of your behaviors that
Yes, yeah.
are impacting your ability to overcome that challenge. But I think the approach with anything, and this is where the value of coaching isn't just in, the sessions you have with a coach. They're longer lasting. They change how you approach problems. You
Mm,
change, as a client, they change your critical thinking and how you approach the same sort of challenge in the future. And it's much easier when someone is able to focus or put up or look at a challenge through a different lens
mm,
after they've been, working with you as a coach. Now, I want to shift through to, let's talk about middle management.
mm.
First off, I want you to just tell us what middle management is
Yeah.
and actually what it looks like in the hospitality industry as well.
Yeah. Which is such a great question as well. Um, so like I describe the middle management layer as the layer that sits below your most senior member of the organization. So from my experience in corporate, the middle management layer that I was a part of, we reported into the senior execs. So like the C-suite, if you like. And I think in hospitality, you could describe that as the layer that sits below your general manager or
Mhm.
your head chef. It's just that next layer down
Yep.
who are who I think and who I describe as being the most pressured in any organization because they have such a key. influence on the performance of the business, but are too often squashed from all sides and are not being supported, not being recognized, not being invested in. So, when you're in that middle management layer, you literally have to be something for everyone. You have
Mhm.
to, manage up, which we talk about a lot in corporate. You're always being told to manage upwards, especially in the middle management layer, which I find quite frustrating because it always seemed to, and it didn't matter what organization I worked in, I might add, there always seemed to be this expectation that if you're in a middle manager role, you need to manage your chief exec as well as yourself, as well as your direct reports. Oh, and as well as your peer group. Like you're essentially managing everybody because the expectation is that high on you to be able to do that. The question I always had was who's managing me other than
Mhm.
myself? And why am I, now I've reached this level, why does that negate that I need support or guidance or direction? Or, I mean, it's a strange attitude, I think, to middle
Yeah.
managers, especially as well. Most organizations are quick to blame them from any issues or challenges or underperformance. Um, but yet they won't complement that with then how they're behaving towards them and the investment they're giving to them. So it's a very challenging space. And I think it's a space where you see a lot of burnout, you see a lot of
Mhm.
people leaving, and unsurprisingly, really, like why would you want to stay
Yeah.
there? And I think that's the sadness I feel that it's actually such a great role of responsibility and accountability. And it's a privilege to be there. And so many of us work so hard to get it. But the reality doesn't match that. When you
Yeah.
get there, so often it's just so unenjoyable. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that I'm really passionate about focusing on with my clients is that, and I know people don't generally like to use the word happiness in the work context, but I think it's possible. But the fact is
Yeah.
that when you enjoy what you're doing and you really feel a passion and a purpose in it, you do a bloody great job. Like it's not rocket science again. A lot of my concepts are quite simple. But you don't I don't think anyone shows up to work to do a crap job. I don't think people wake up in the morning and go, do you know what? Today I'm gonna be a real dick. I think people go to work and if they're not doing well from a perception piece, you've got to work out what's going on.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's because they're really unhappy about something,
Mhm.
but no one's addressing it. But like the more happy you are and the more you enjoy what you just do a really great job. Like they're all connected.
This is I talk about that in particular a lot, certainly aimed at C-suite members is if they can get their leadership right and they can make everyone's life better,
Mm.
then you're gonna, certainly in the hospitality context where we're talking about guest experience and,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
being your product, that's what we sell. And it's so dependent on how your people, the people that are interacting with your guests, show up. And if they're not happy, it's
Mm.
gonna reflect it's gonna reflect in that service that's getting offered. And we're so focused as a society on targets and the financial
Yeah,
performance, and
yeah.
we don't necessarily take that moment to step back and say, actually, as a leader, as a senior leader, if I can treat my middle managers better, then actually the guest has a better experience and oh, they come back more often or
Yeah.
they spend a little bit more money. And then actually that focus on the finances, you've taken the focus off the finance, put it on the people, but the financial side starts to grow again and people lose sight of that sometimes, I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. I think it's totally true. And I think that's true in all industries. I
Yeah.
think in hospitality, it's so acute because the
Yeah.
distance between the team and the guest is so small and you're
Yeah.
seeing them physically in real time. In corporate, I've worked a lot in customer service functions. Well, yes, there was a lot of face-to-face
Mhm.
interactions, but the majority on the day-to-day basis consistent was over the phone, and that creates separation.
Mhm.
But if customers could still sense unhappiness and dissatisfaction through the phone. Um, but clearly you had a lot more separation. And when you're talking about the C-suite, I mean, they can be so far removed from the customer and that can often be one of the biggest challenges for the management is to try and reconnect them with actually what's going on because they're too far away. Um, but yeah, there's so much research out there that's been
Mhm.
done around business turnover and employee happiness, they are directly linked because, as you
Yeah.
describe, it is about the customer will know and will feel a sense of, customer care and good quality service, loyalty from the employees. And that comes from how they're feeling on any given day. They are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the more work we do, it's about raising that awareness of what is connected. Certainly, hospitality turnover figures. I think the average turnover, 12-month turnover in hospitality is like over 75%, which
Yeah, I
is
can believe it.
crazy.
Yeah.
Some businesses are in, the mid hundreds in terms of
Mm,
turnover. And I think there's something a little bit more, there's a fundamental challenge that they have to overface. But
yeah.
in, obviously from a middle manager's perspective, their life could be made a lot easier by senior leaders, as you just said, as you just
Mm,
mentioned. What is your advice to senior leaders then
mm.
on how they can be more in touch with one, the middle managers themselves as people, but also that connection to the customer?
Yeah. I think what seems to disappear for senior managers as they go through organizations is in my opinion, that people connection internally. I think when you hit the C-suite level, and that role itself, I'm not taking away how pressured or challenging that is either. But I do think it becomes very heavily weighted in I think the commercial areas of business. I think it can often get too caught up in the strategy of the
Yeah.
future. And I think there isn't enough at times. I think importance given to the present and what's going on and staying close to the organization through the people. So I think too often in organizations I've worked in, yes, they've been very large, so that's always going to be a challenge. But I
Hmm.
think it's true of small is that just because you're at the top doesn't mean that you are invisible or that you stay at the top. Like you continue to interact with all levels, that you spend time with your people, and that you don't forget fundamentally that a big part of your job is to manage people.
Hmm.
I think it gets to that point, and I think I probably described it when I was talking about the expectations on the middle manager level. But like everyone benefits from being engaged with and supported around their development. Everyone benefits from being listened to. We talk about holding space. That's true in management. Like
Hmm.
as a manager of people, holding space for those you manage
Yeah.
one on one is invaluable. And I think sometimes you get up to the middle management layer in the C suite, and it's as though it's this belief of, well, we're as senior as we are, we're experienced as we are, we've been here for as long as we are. We probably don't need to have those types of conversations, or we don't really need to do this because we know what we're doing. And I disagree with that.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you get into dangerous spaces of assuming you know things and know everything and that you no longer need the space to learn or develop
Hmm.
or, it's just not true. So I just think the relationships I've had that were the most effective when I was in that middle management space were those where my senior manager still recognized that and still gave that to me. But I have to admit, that didn't go without me having to request it. And I
Hmm.
do think as a manager of any level, this isn't just true of middle managers, but I think, clearly that's what we're talking about. You can always ask for what you want.
Yeah.
And like, you should never, I think, avoid those conversations. Like, you have to recognize, like, we talked about this in respect of coaching, you have to recognize the importance of managing yourself.
Hmm.
And a part of that is knowing what you need and then asking for it. And especially if it's not happening, like, you can get incredulous about it and moan that, you're not being given the things that you require and no one's giving you time and attention and you're not getting any personal development support, my favorite. But actually, if you're not asking for those things, if you're not driving those conversations or feeding into them and influencing them, you're just as much to blame as anybody else. Like your personal development, and I think your success is all your own.
Hmm.
It's not about anybody else. It's not anyone else's responsibility. So I think you've got to be careful not to be a martyr about it,
Yeah.
like, so that I am a bit, I suppose, my business is called Grit for good reason. There's a bit of tongue in cheek about it in terms of like, go get your success, like get a grip of it, take
Yeah.
control, like and especially at that senior level, I'm like, there's nothing stopping you really. Like, just do it. Like, you've earned that much. You know. So I think they're kind of my key pieces of advice. I think it's senior managers, don't forget that a big part of your role is still to manage people, and that you've got people who are looking for your support, for your time, for your guidance, for your ear, just to be listened to. And that middle managers, like, be clear about what you want and ask for it. Make it happen.
Yeah.
Don't sit around.
There's the number of conversations I've had with senior execs that aren't having regular one-on-one time
Yeah. Yeah.
with their people is eye-watering. And you know, when we talk about, especially as a middle manager moving higher up an organization,
Mm.
they need more support
Yeah,
because they're dealing
absolutely.
with, you know, as you spoke about before, the C-suite is all strategy and it's targets, and it's below that is where we're starting looking at execution. And
Yes, yeah.
middle managers are balancing both. They're making sure that the execution is happening whilst making sure it's being executed in the direction of a strategy.
Yeah.
They're the people that really need their boss to be, an hour a week,
Yeah.
maybe even every other week if you're that time crunched or you've got lots of
Mm.
people. But the connection it builds and the trust and the relationship, more importantly, is massive from an operational point of view. The
Yeah.
operational elements become so much easier once you've got that connection with people.
Yeah. And when you've been able to have those conversations to ensure that you're all aligned and that
Yeah.
you've worked through like the ideas, the challenges, you've put in place, the plan to prevent problems if they're going to be any, or, if that's even possible. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
not. But at least then if you're checking in regularly, you're understanding what those problems are as they're appearing, and you're assessing and you're reviewing and moving on. Like, I think what you described is what I find often too. And that hasn't really changed. It's that whole not valuing that
Mm.
time, and it really saddens me when I hear people say, "Oh, I just don't find that time very helpful," or "I don't enjoy it," or "It moves all the time. Like, we always cancel that out." And I think it's because no one, it's not on anyone's shoulders. I don't
Mm.
think anyone is valuing the importance of that time, and it's too easy to cancel it.
Yeah.
And
And
that's wrong. Like, it
yeah,
shouldn't be easy to cancel, because it should be time that everyone's looking forward to. But
yeah,
there's something fundamentally not working, and that could be down to the relationship as well. Because I think you look forward to time together one on one when you enjoy being together. And if you don't want that one on one time, and you're quite happy to cancel it, something's not working there with the relationship,
yeah,
because you're not valuing the time. You don't want to spend it together.
yeah.
So then it's about the trust and the connection and what's happening. Um, but that always saddens me when people are like, "Oh yeah," I was working with a client recently, I think it was last week, who admitted they haven't had a one-to-one with their boss since January. And I
Wow.
was thinking, we're nearly towards the end of the year.
Yeah,
Like, how do you know how you're doing? Like,
yeah,
how, not just that, but it was clearly a problem as well. They were talking about the challenges they have with the relationship with this senior manager, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not surprised,
yeah,
because no one's making time for each other. But it's worrying from the efficiency of an organization if people are not speaking to each other.
yeah,
How do you know how you're doing, really? You know, it's
yeah.
that.
And we can communicate. Group communicate is, you can spread messages. We can communicate through group means, and it serves a purpose. But when we're talking about individuals, individual performance, you can't
Mm,
communicate that properly. Precisely what you've just said.
no,
But one thing, and I wanted to talk over you before when you talked about, people not valuing the time and leaders not feeling like it's valuable. It's not about you.
yeah,
These one-on-ones are never about you. It's and I don't know, you may come up against exactly the same thing. Is that's where people come from. They see these meetings as being, operational focused, or, professional development, or whatever it is. And ultimately, as a leader, that should not concern you. In, you should be talking maximum 20% of the time in a meeting.
Yeah, yeah,
It should be your direct report who's got this space, similar to a coaching session. They have that space to explore things, to ask or tell you what they need to do their job, and for you
yeah,
to listen. They're
yeah,
very valuable. It's very, very valuable when it's done properly.
yeah. You're totally right. And I think, again, it's not uncommon to hear people describe, well, from both sides, I think. I've had leaders say, well, I go into the session and they don't say anything. I do all the talking. And then I come out and I have no idea whether that went well or whether they took on board anything I
Yeah.
said. I felt like I gave them all the ideas. And it's so interesting when you then ask them, well, what questions did you ask? You know, so often that the penny drops when they're like, I didn't ask any. And
Mm.
I think, well, this is where it's really understanding the techniques to
Mhm.
effectively communicate.
Yeah.
You know, so much of communication, effective communication, is not about talking at all. It's about listening.
Yeah.
And, and that was a lesson that I went through when I did my coaching training. In 2014, when I first was coached and I decided this is something I want to learn, I would have said I was a terrible listener. I didn't listen. I always was talking. You'll be unsurprised, from this experience, you can't get a word in edgeways. I am an extroverted character. I love to share, probably too much. I'm also described as an oversharer, but I've always got a lot to say. I can fill a gap is the
Yeah.
point. And it is a problem at times, especially if I feel uncomfortable. And it was
Mhm.
true as a manager. There were times when I felt very uncomfortable in my management career, in my skills as a manager. And I would fill every silence that there was. I didn't recognize that the silence was probably telling me something and I should be listening more, And I was putting myself under pressure to do all the talking, to have all the answers, to set the direction, to tell people what to do. It was exhausting for me. It must have been horrendous for whoever I was managing. That I was probably the epitome of a micromanager. It was hell. And I hate being micromanaged. So, talk about, the irony of it. But I do think too often there's that I've done all the talking and they've said nothing and it was exhausting and it's
Mhm.
hard work for me as the leader to do this. So I don't want to do it because it makes me feel crap. But it's not understanding what's not working and how to fix it. And then it's the same for the recipient. It's like, well, I go in and I don't know what to say. I
Mm.
feel uncomfortable. I feel awkward. They just talk at me. Or you get that really awful experience where the person whose one-to-one it is feels like there's an agenda and it's just an agenda they've not been told about. So they're not really sure what it is. And they've been uncomfortable because the whole time they're spending second guessing why they're there, what it's actually all about, what their manager really wants, And again, it's just highlighting what we've described, which is there is not a good relationship there.
Yeah.
The investment needs to be in the relationship because there's not trust and no one's managing expectations and that space isn't being held for the right person, as you articulated so beautifully. And so the benefit isn't being gained from anyone.
Imagine if your business had a playbook that helps anyone pick it up and see exactly how your business is run in any role for any task at any time of the day. Well, Trainual is something that delivers just that. It is a software platform that allows you to put your entire business playbook, which is what we help you develop, in a digital form for people to see when they need it. From checklists to policies to procedures, and also your company profile. Everything is there at your people's fingertips when they need it. Head over to thecafehustle.com/trainual right now and you can get involved with what is the best platform for creating your entire business playbook. That's thecafehustle.com/trainual. Yeah, and it is, and then that's where it becomes wasted time, and
Yeah.
and you know the amount of work I do getting get these set up for people in the right way with the right framework or at least the right structure, and it
Mm,
changes that perspective. Now I want to shift to strategies for middle managers in particular to use, and I know you touched on one before about asking for what you want
yeah.
or what you need to do
Yeah.
your job better. What other things can we do as middle managers that can make our lives a little bit easier?
Yeah. I think asking for what you want, before that, it has to be you have to be clear on actually what that is. So you have to know who you are. You have to know what you stand for. You have to know what's important for you and your purpose. And you have to spend a bit of time thinking about knowing what enables you to be your best. You have to recognize, I think, all of those things before you can then ask for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I always say my first step for all management is get to know yourself first, like we've said, and spend the time there. It's so important, and don't dismiss the value of doing it. So I think it's that. I think it's then being really clear on, what are your priorities? What do you actually believe are the key parts of your job and your role? Like, some of that I think requires people to go back to basics. What is your role? What do you believe your responsibilities are? And then how does that then feed into your day to day? And, the priorities of what you're there to do day on day, week on week, month on month, wrap it up into a year, so that actually you're clear on that. And that can be what guides you at all times. It can guide you around the decisions you make, the action you take, the activities you get involved in. It can really help with then knowing what to pass off.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we've just talked about me admitting historically I definitely was a micromanager. But I think that was not recognizing what my responsibilities were clearly and what my role was. And I think once you're clear of that, you're able to then look at things and go, well, is this for me or is this for somebody
Mm-hmm.
else? Rather than just jumping in and doing everything. Because there's nothing worse, and I think, again, this is true in hospitality and I've seen it. There's nothing worse than being there, knowing you've got a job, but not feeling you're able to do it. I remember working in my own pub. We had a general manager who insisted on serving every table. I had brilliant waitresses and waiters,
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant, totally competent, really effective, loved working with the customer. They were actually enjoying their job. I mean, if you've got people like that, you keep them.
Yeah.
But he insisted that he had to be the one that took the order from every table. And I was thinking, that's not your job.
Yeah.
But that's someone clearly who could not recognize their responsibilities, and then equally had not built up the trust with the team to feel able to delegate.
Yeah.
But you can't delegate if you haven't worked out what your role is and your responsibility. That was not it. We had to have some conversations around how that was not efficient or effective, and that I had people wandering around looking bored, disengaged, being paid to not do a lot, while I've got a general manager running around like an idiot. And I was like, this is not worth. But, I think you've got to be clear about your priorities to then know where your time is best spent. And then you actually support everybody else to do the same.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing I would say is boundaries. Boundaries
Yeah.
is the thing I think that comes up so often, is knowing when to say yes, when to say no. And it all links to what I've described, because I think when you know yourself and how you best work, you know the parameters within which you want to work as well. You know what, you need when you want to start, when you want to finish, when you'll need a break, what that break needs to look like, what you're happy to do, what you're not. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can't always say no to the things you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you've got to face into them.
Yeah.
But, I think if you recognize your boundaries, you can better manage people. You can manage expectations so much better.
Yeah.
Because people don't mind being told no if they understand why. But there's nothing worse than saying yes to everything and doing everything and then doing things badly. You let people down more.
Yeah, well, and it comes back to what you mentioned earlier about managing up. And this is where that really plays. If you're able to do that, you're able to then manage your boundaries much better, because you're able to communicate better. Again, it comes back to that trust, that relationship, that connection. So you can communicate, whether it's workload related or whether it's, whether it's even relevant or
Yeah.
reasonable for you to be doing that work. You need to be able to communicate that, which is built off that relationship. Again, that relationship's built up by spending that time, one-on-ones, quality one-on-one time. But, and all these layers come together to make everyone's life easier in an organization. It's that educational part, that awareness part, which is most challenging, for us And I imagine certainly for me, but for you as well, probably is the
Yeah,
same.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And, I know a lot of what we're talking about, yes, it's deep-seated
Mhm.
in my experience in corporate, but it's totally applicable to hospitality too. And I think, I learned that probably the hard way, without a doubt, transitioning into my own hospitality business and it being a complete shock to the system compared to what I'd been used to for 15 years before that, working in a 9 to 5 office environment. Um, but I think it requires intention and discipline to do this. It's not okay to say, well, we just don't have the time for it.
Yeah.
Yes, fine. In a corporate environment, I had the benefit of being able to book an hour with my people. But actually in hospitality, if an hour is not
God.
possible, you take half an hour, you
Yeah.
take 20 minutes. It's still good time.
Absolutely.
And that's enough time to check in with people and go, how are you doing? How are you feeling? You know, what's going on for you at the moment? How is everything working? What do you think's going well? What do you not think's going well? What can I do better to support you? It's that you've got enough time. Like you've got break times. You just have to be disciplined about it. You just have to, have that intention and intentionally do it knowing it's going to be a benefit and not easily, quickly dismiss it just because it is fast moving because everyone's tired. I think that, maintaining the energy is one of the biggest challenges. And when energy is waning because the day's been long, there's been a lot of business, people have started early, we're going to be working late. It is easy just to go, oh, I'm just too
Yeah.
tired for this now. But it's the worst thing to do without a doubt.
Yeah.
Um,
And it communicates it certainly of you as the leader is the one that's kicking it. It doesn't really demonstrate value of an employee either when
exactly.
you are basically saying you haven't got time for them.
Yeah,
Now
exactly.
we're getting close on time, ironically. And I don't want to go over our slot, but I wanted to touch on the benefits of coaching very
Mm,
quickly to an overall organization, when maybe the senior leaders decide that actually it's a great opportunity for their middle managers to get some coaching. What are
mm.
the benefits to that overall organization when they take that approach?
I think any senior leadership team investing in any form of people development, whether that's coaching, mentoring, schemes, training, is making a loud statement that we care about you,
Hmm.
um, and that we recognize it's important. And I think immediately as a decision, that reverberates through organizations and aids the development of a positive culture. So I think even just making that decision and commitment, and I would say it's not just about the decision to do it, it's giving people the space to be able to have it
Yeah.
and to do it well. I think they have to come hand in hand and they're not the same thing. um, I think that sounds a very loud message.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, you know, when you see some of the stats that are out there at the moment, and it's a bit scary, and I think a recent article I read in The Guardian that was published last month, 15th of October, I think it was. The title of it was Bad Management Has Prompted 1 in 3 UK Workers to Quit. So this is research from the Chartered Management Institute. And 28% of respondents stated that they left their job due to a negative relationship with a manager, which I can totally believe. And a third stated that having an ineffective manager meant they were less motivated to do a good job. I mean, this is not rocket science again. Like none of this is a no-brainer. But the fact is there are too many bad managers out there not doing a very good job. And as I said, I don't think they're showing up to do that intentionally.
Yeah.
I just think they are crying out for personal development and support.
Yeah.
And I think coaching enables that. I think it gives, like we've described on this episode, it creates that space. It's a safe space. It's a separate space. I think that's such an important thing. It's a space away from the
Yeah.
data in the operation to actually do some thinking, do some exploration, understand how that person is feeling, what they're thinking, how they're behaving, how they can grow their self-awareness around all of those things and use it to enable them to think about maybe doing some stuff differently,
Mhm.
making some different choices, making some different choices about how they behave, how they show up, which, we've talked about it. It has such an incredibly powerful impact to then how they're building relationships, how people are responding to them, how they're influencing a space. Like, you can never disregard how someone's behavior influences a space.
Yeah. Oh,
Like, and especially like when we're talking about hospitality, those spaces, they're small, they're busy, they're hectic, there's loads going on, you know, it can be so damaging. So I think when you hear stats like that from The Guardian, like, it's time for businesses to recognize
yeah,
that
absolutely.
people are voting with their feet and it's being impacted by other people. So actually, if you can invest the time and the resources into really enabling people to be good managers and to strengthen their skills in management, you will decrease that
Yeah.
attrition and you will keep people there. Um, and you'll create cultures and environments where people want to be because they're realizing that they're there for their own benefit and to support them to be great.
I think it's certainly something. It's the message that we, you know, try and talk about is once you are able to give people that space, then they make your life as a
Yeah.
leader, as their leader. It makes it sound like it's some sort of political movement, but their
But
boss,
it kind of is in a way.
their boss is your people can then do more without having to come to you every 2 minutes.
Yes,
The whole
absolutely.
organization is more autonomous. It's more
Yeah.
agile as a result. And you're
Yeah.
right. I think it comes down to people. People know what they need to do at the end of the day. You go on LinkedIn and people are talking about all these great things that they should be doing for their people, but the execution of it it's a totally different story. And
Yeah.
I've heard some horror stories of people on one hand are at expos shouting about how great they treat their people and how people focused they are, and then on the other hand you've got people actually working there aren't seeing that same image. And
Yeah.
it certainly for our industry it's something we need to clamp down on and to really focus in on those
Yeah.
people. Now, are you all right for another couple of minutes while
Yeah, I am.
are
Yeah,
you
no, I'm
that's good.
fine.
That's good. I know
I'm good. As
we've
long as it's
we've
all right
run
with you.
over our slot here, but yeah, I want to turn to books now, and it's one of the since we rebranded the podcast to the Hospitality Leadership Podcast, it's been more of a focus for me because there's so much knowledge
Mm,
in books out there.
mm,
What is one particular book that's made a real impact for you,
yeah.
whether it's as your career as a coach now or as your own personal development or in your personal life even? Which is the one that's really left its mark?
I found this so hard to work out. I was like, I had that bit of pre-prep time and I was thinking, oh my God, I've got so many. And I was thinking, I can't be cheeky and pick like my top five and be here forever. I think I've got two that stand out for me and I think they're relevant to not just this topic, but I would like to hope the audience as well, whether they're, you know, in hospitality or not. But I think there are two that really stand out. One is Nancy Klein, Time to Think. And it is a brilliant book that really talks about this notion of creating space for people to think and the power of doing that. That, to your point, people do know what the right thing is for them and often have the right idea on how to do things for others, but it's the execution that isn't always successful. And I think time is the one of the enablers to improve that in terms of giving time to actually think it through, get the details nailed, think about the execution, perhaps potentially even explore that through safe spaces and collaboration with others, and then go out and deliver it.
Yeah,
And Nancy Klein has done so much work in the space of um, thought and management and effective management and use of time. And the book is just so practical and has plenty of advice and ideas as to how to actually bring it to life and the questions to use to facilitate to help people to think. So I really recommend that. And I think that has a lot of relevance to what we've talked about. And then the other is Dr. Susan David's Emotional Agility. And Dr. Susan David is someone who I hugely admire and I've followed for years. Um, and she talks a lot about that real understanding of ourselves and how we think and how that translates into our behavior and how we can really harness that understanding of ourselves and put ourselves better in control of that trigger response.
Hmm.
And I think, again, that has so much relevancy for, what we've talked about, but also in hospitality when emotions are running high
Hmm.
because of the nature of the business and its interaction and involvement and reliance on people and the pressures it brings. So yeah, they're my top two. I know you said for one, but I've cheated.
Oh
Top
no,
two.
it's all, the more the better. That's always the way. It's yeah, and think like I haven't read either of those, so they'll be next on
I
my
highly
list. And
recommend, both brilliant.
yeah, and it's but it is there's so much out there. There's so much knowledge to tap into. Again, I appreciate people don't always have the time
Mm.
to read these, but there's things out there like Blinkist, which can
Yeah,
summaries of books even, which can
yeah,
always
absolutely.
help you
And
tap
audio
into
books
more
as well.
knowledge.
A lot
Yeah.
of these are now in audio version,
Yeah,
so you can listen
absolutely.
to them as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
while you're prepping. That's what I used to do in our coffee shop. So, but yeah, no, listen, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for, to be honest, it's been a great conversation for me, chatting with another coach and sharing those experiences that we have, which is always great. But where can people find out more about you and reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, again, thank you so much for having me. I've loved this conversation. Um, they can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I love talking to people on LinkedIn and connecting with people. So always reach out to me there. So you can find me just by searching for my name on LinkedIn, which is Lisa Robyn Wood, Robin with a Y. You will find me. I am the middle manager coach, as I described. And then you can also find me on Instagram, which is at grip_coaching. And then also my website, which is gripcoaching.co.uk. And then if you want to listen to me any further, if you've not quite had
Yeah,
enough
of
of my
course.
rambling voice or my face, then you can find me at my own podcast, which is The Coaching Cast.
Yeah.
And again, you'll find us on all major platforms and on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't even get to cover that, and it's yeah, it's great that talking to other podcasts. Maybe we'll have to leave that for another time. We'll
Yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
our
Yeah.
podcast experience. But listen, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your knowledge, your experience with us here at the Hospitality Leadership Podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much again for having me.